Everybody for all your contributions this morning and to all of our speakers this morning. I saw quite a lot of people talking to each other, aka networking over lunch, so that's always great to see too. And we have got some new people that have arrived this afternoon as well, so you're very welcome. So our next session is our keynote. And I'm just checking that the tech is working. Yep, okay. So we're very lucky today to have Professor Christopher Smith from the AHRC here today with a discussion chaired by Professor Jemina Napier, who some of you will notice was in the physical room this morning and is now in another signed physical room to be able to chair this. And Professor Smith is going to talk to us about why the EDI Caucus matters and what will UKRI do differently as a result of the work of the EDI Caucus. So I will now hand over to Jemina.
Thanks, Kate. You've done a lovely introduction, and because we are running a bit behind time, I'll just hand straight over to Christopher so he's going to introduce himself in a bit more detail and give his presentation. I'll be working through his slides and then I'll be facilitating some Q&A at the end. We have a Slido, so do feel free to ask your questions, to post your questions so that we can have some discussion hopefully at the end if we've got time. Thanks. Over to you, Christopher.
Thank you very much, Jemina. Thank you, everybody. It's a real pleasure to be here with you, albeit virtually. If it's helpful to anyone, I'm a 6-year-old white man and I'm sitting here in a white shirt, blue tie. My backdrop is a slightly lurid green. The lurid green may relate to where I am because I'm speaking to you from Oslo in Norway, where we've just ended a session of a body called Science Europe, which gathers together the funding bodies in all the European countries. And we've done a session here co-hosted by UKRI and the Norwegian Research Council, looking at policies in science. And part of my role is to be the international champion for UKRI as well as our EDI champion at the moment. And I want to talk a little bit about, I want to start by talking about the international and global context. If you could move to the next slide, Jemina. There we go. So what Science Europe and bodies like that do is to produce policy documents and statements about the importance of research culture and the importance of EDI. And I want to start off by saying that for me and for UKRI, the critical point is that EDI is not something that we do to tick a box. It is valuable in and of itself, but it is particularly important to us because EDI is good for science. We have documents and links through the Science Europe work, reports that are produced on their website, which show that EDI improves research quality and impact. So diverse representation brings a wider range of perspectives, ideas and approaches, which enhances the robustness and creativity of scientific research. We know that EDI creates fair and attractive research environments, which supports positive and inclusive cultures that attract and retain talented individuals from all backgrounds, and that strengthens the research workforce. And this aligns with moral, ethical, and systemic imperatives. So promoting EDI is not just a matter of fairness, it's also a strategic necessity for building healthy research systems, and healthy research systems embed shared values and but also draw on the research that we do. So there is a beneficial circle, a virtuous circle between having a diverse and equalized workforce, bringing a variety of perspectives that improves research, but it also draws on research which is showing the value of thinking through different perspectives. And for somebody who works in arts and humanities, this is really critical. Our subject matter is all of humanity, all of its history, all of our present and all of our future, everything humans have ever done or thought or said or left on a wall or in the ground. That's all us, that's all what we study. So nothing is outside, and we need to gather as many voices and perspectives as possible. So this global context, these high-level documents, which are produced by bodies such as Science Europe, where I've been today, give one context. If we then move to the next slide, please, Jemina, to UKRI. So as you know, UKRI is the umbrella body which brings together all the research councils, Research England, Innovate UK, and the Science and Technology Funding Council, to create an ecosystem for research and innovation. We have a substantial budget, and there are lots of exciting things that we do in terms of discovery research and mission-driven research, but we also hope to intervene in research culture. EDICa is part of our UKRI EDI journey. It has provided high-quality research evidence into inequalities in the research and innovation sector, particularly those affecting underrepresented and vulnerable groups. And we're really grateful for the way that you have so caringly and thoughtfully gathered evidence that we can use to think about how we improve as a funding body. So we know that we've been able to work with the EDICa team to better understand lived experiences of disabled and neurodivergent colleagues in our workforce. We know that you've helped us identify areas of progress, including flexible working arrangements, peer support networks, proactive line management, and areas where we needed to improve adjustments processes, policy clarity, line managers who need to understand their role and what they should be doing and what they can do. We know that in UKRI, we've still got a lot of work to do. We published our first equality, diversity and inclusion strategy and a suite of action plans in March 23, which started to move us along a journey. And we're trying to work through evidence, so it was an evidence-informed and led organisation. One of the things that we're doing in order both to be led by the evidence but also to make it transparent is to publish our UKRI application and success rate diversity data. So that helps us understand what works and what doesn't work. We've also commissioned an evidence review on bullying and harassment. So we're beginning to make a difference, but we know that EDICa is challenging us, which I really welcome. Hard at how we can change our funding schemes and processes, reduce barriers to inclusion, for instance, through changes in terms and conditions. And we will continue to consider this evidence and see how it can be applied in practice. Examples include EPSRC embedding accessibility into strategic infrastructure funding, the nature of labs and the spaces in which we work. So that's UKRI. Now I want to talk, if I may, if we go to the next slide, just something about the Arts and Humanities Research Council. It's really important for us to find ways in which we can embed EDI. As I've said, it's part of our study mechanism. Our disciplines depend on a diverse range of methods, viewpoints, subjects and approaches. And we are committed to a long-term plan of action around EDI. We are introducing greater degrees of safeguarding against discrimination. We've done a lot of work to improve the diversity of our peer review college, because as we know, it's one thing having people apply. We need a peer review college which is really thinking carefully about EDI when it makes its decisions, so we translate application into success. There's a lot of work for us to do, and I'm not going to pretend that we're on top of this, because we're not. Arts and humanities as a whole talk's a good game. We recognise many of the issues, we can describe them very well, but there are huge systemic and structural problems in the pipeline, which means that our statistics are nowhere near where I would like them to be. Some of that is in our gift to do something about, some of it is less so. One of the areas I'm particularly interested in generally in UKRI and specifically in AHRC is around whether we are understanding the needs and the opportunities from an increasingly declared neurodivergent population. And I think there's a little bit of work that we should be doing there generally, using our research, drawing on research and evidence, but also thinking about just process. We go to the very last slide. I just want to say here that one of the key things for us is that we know that if we as a research council embed EDI in our grant funding, that will begin to start to shift the dial on understanding of EDI in universities, in the research community. It will improve the way that we draw on results, and hopefully in due course it will actually refresh the pipeline of people coming into arts and humanities research, make it more diverse itself. So this is just giving you one example. Locally unlocking culture through inclusive access, LUCIA. This program is about fund networks which are based in places to use arts and humanities ideas to improve local policy. So we're working very closely with the local government to think about their cultural plans, think about access to culture from underrepresented groups, etc. Promote urban cultural renewal. What we were keen to do was to make sure that we not only talked about inclusion, but we actually embodied it in the grant. So we partnered with EDICa to evaluate how EDI concerns are integrated into each stage of the funding process, in particular the application and assessment stages. That included video diary studies, including applicants, and really capturing experiences of participants capturing challenges encountered, training drop-in sessions to enable participants to record their video diaries. And we hope that in the application process will then feed into the work that is done where video diaries, blogs, different kinds of captures of information are already quite standard. But just moving that back further and further in the process, taking account of these different ways of self-presentation and then using that in assessment is one way that we're hoping that we shift the dial generally. So Jemina, I'm going to stop there to give time for questions. I hope that gave something of an indication of where I think we sit in a more global positioning, why EDICa's work is really important to UKRI and how we've learned from it in AHRC. I'm afraid I can't hear you, Jemina. I think you're muted.
There we go. Thank you. And thank you so much to Professor Smith for a great keynote, and really inspiring actually to hear that UKRI has not only invested in the EDI Caucus, but it's actually applying the findings and the evidence from the caucus back into its own organisation, into its own work, and seeing how we can impact more widely on the research and innovation ecosystem here in the UK, and we're sure further afield internationally as well. So we can see that there are several questions already in the Slido, which is fantastic. So remember that you can put a thumbs up against a question that you particularly would like to see asked, and the more upticks we get, then we might focus on the questions that seem to be the most popular. So we'll start off with the one at the top, which is given the increasingly febrile political environment for EDI actions and research, how does UKRI propose to navigate these political challenges?
It's a challenge that we've been talking about here in this meeting, because it's not just a UK problem, of course, it's a much wider issue. Some part of that answer is going to be that we should carry on doing what we know is right, because I think there is a degree to which it's not a matter of ignoring the concerns, but recognizing that what we're trying to do here is the right thing to do. And I don't think that we should suddenly bend and go in a different direction just because there are some negative stories in the press. That's not how one does science, but it does mean that one needs to make the case, which is why the evidence of EDICa and others gathering showing the EDI is actually a positive benefit is very helpful. I think there are things that we can do as a community to think about the way we present our research. It's great fun to have a kind of striking, catchy PhD. It doesn't necessarily need to sit in gateway to research and draw attention to that in an uncomfortable way. I'm not trying to censor here. I'm very, very happy for people to study the work they want to do. It's not my concern. That's why we have peer review. That's why we devolve, particularly for PhDs, the responsibility to organizations to make those choices. That's right, and that's fine. But we can think about the way that we present our research, focus on the seriousness and the rigor that is undoubtedly underneath the title and the abstract. I think there are. It is complicated, this, because there are so many different sort of sets in this. We need to look after our own workforce. So it's really important that we have a proper approach to EDI in our workforce. Some of that is actually a legal requirement. There is how we make sure that we're understanding and fostering good EDI practice on behalf of our staff and in assessment processes. Again, that's a requirement of us. We can do that through better training. And then I think there are issues around how we support diversity in the research workforce. Talked a little bit about that, but all of these things need their own answer. So seriousness, but also a degree of determination to do the right thing, because and gather the evidence for why it's the right thing.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. That was I think that's a very considered answer, and I think you're right that it's easy to get caught up in what we see happening in the media, being talked about in the media, without actually needing to take stock of what's happening in our own back garden, if you like, and actually, we're looking at what's realistic, what's feasible, and what's manageable, and also, what the implications are and the potential impacts of every decision that we make in that space. Moving on then to the next question, what advice can the AHRC give around diversifying its peer review college whilst also maintaining the expertise needed to assess a breadth of proposals? I think this is quite a curly question in some ways. What do you think?
Yeah, we were pleased at the results. We set a very high target for diversity within the peer review college. We set out very deliberately and very explicitly that we wanted the peer review college to hit national targets, not university targets. And of course, national targets of diversity are often ahead of university targets. We didn't hit every one of those benchmarks, but it was, I think, a signal. We will go round again and keep refreshing the peer review college. Our starting point was that diversifying the peer review college, which actually enhanced the breadth of expertise that we had, that it was actually in itself what we needed to do. But it was also just a very good thing to remind people that a peer review college needs to be refreshed from below, and that actually you need some experience to be able to review. Obviously, it's not something, you wouldn't expect a PhD student to be sitting on a peer review panel, except in very particular circumstances. But you equally don't need to be me. You don't need to be my age. You don't need to look like me to be a good peer reviewer. In fact, I'm a rubbish peer reviewer. I find it very hard to do it right. I always get very nervous. So actually we need people who are fresh to their subjects, who are enthusiastic and keen and alive to what's really happening in the subject, perhaps earlier in their career, to be part of that peer review college. So constantly refreshing is really important. We are mindful that there are some tricky things here. One of the areas that I'm concerned about, and if anybody has any thoughts, I'd welcome them. We don't pay for peer review in UKRI, and that's been a very strong decision for a long time. I think it's probably the right decision. There's not much money in the system, and I worry that there's not much evidence either that paying makes a lot of difference. But there are sections of the population, particularly for AHRC, for instance, fractional staff in areas like art practice, creative writing, etc., for whom the additional burden of peer review is really quite hard, and yet their expertise is so vital. So there's a conflict between their precarity and their fractionality and the experience that they bring, and that's something that has been on my mind for a long time. How can we resolve that without breaking the principle of not paying for peer review? It's something I keep wrestling with. So some of that, I'm not sure I've given you advice, but I would say it was an extremely positive experience. We really enjoyed it, and I think our peer review at college is just the better for it.
Thanks for that response. And I think you made a really good point there about how diversifying the panel has actually increased the breadth of expertise, because you are able to then bring people with different lived experiences, different expertise in terms of their research, but also their expertise as, as academics generally. So I think that's a really good point to make. And I think the interesting thing you said there as well about whether we should pay reviewers, I think also links into a lot of discussion around workloads and whether people have, what's featured in people's workloads, and whether, trying to move away from normative expectations that people will do certain things in their own time, whether it's on weekends and evenings. And so, and doing peer reviews might be a part of that. If it's not considered as part of their everyday workload, or if they're not paid to do it, then they're having to focus on, okay, well, my 9-to-5 job is doing the work that I'm paid to do. When do I do this other stuff? So I think it's all interlinked, isn't it, in that sense?
It is complicated, and I think what I would say is I'm not absolutely convinced that the answer to that problem is to pay. So you're absolutely right. There's a sort of, there are problems of normative expectations, but I think there are some people well, has to accept that it might be possible for me to acquire more money and still work at the weekends and so forth, and great. It may just not be possible for somebody else that pay may not do anything to reduce the complexity of their workload or the work-life balance that they're trying to face. So your point about recognition, I think, is a much more significant one. And I think that for those areas, particularly in my own community, where fractionality and precarity, even of senior staff in small specialist institutions, for instance, is quite common, there may be something that we need to do about that. So I think I'm just saying, I suppose, I don't think there's an easy answer to this rather complicated problem, and I think you're saying the same, Jemina.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. I know I'm conscious of time. I know you said you could stay on for a couple more minutes, so I think this next question seems to be the most popular, so we'll focus on this as the last question. So it's with respect to the 3-month pause of the ref, and a rumour that's come out of that more, so there might be more expectations around institutional specialisation. So would that signal more exclusion potentially of researchers who are in less research intensive institutions? What do you think?
So I'm not actually all that close to ref, and so I think I'm going to be more cautious than I usually am about these sorts of things, and trust a little bit to your discretion here. But to be honest, I think that the pause on ref was predominantly motivated by the fact that the sector had managed to get itself into a lot of diametrically opposed positions on a lot of things, that was beginning to rather undermine the notion of what has to be a relatively unified backing for a process of such importance. REF is never, it's always imperfect. It is a very complicated mechanism where lots of people have different views. I think the 3-month pause was very much more a kind of, actually, we all need to catch our breath. We probably need to stop shouting at each other a little bit. We need to reflect a little bit on what the whole purpose of REF is and why it's so important, and isolate some key questions and think about them quite hard. I don't think it was motivated. I don't think there was a lot of prejudice about where the answer was on some of these things. I think there was more a sense of, well, we're now going to have to get somewhere, so let's just take a little bit of time outside of the run to think. And actually, I think that was courageous on all sides. I feel that there's a little less heat in the conversation. Sometimes we all know that sometimes we just need to step back a little bit from a heated situation, from a difficult conversation. We maybe need to gather our thoughts and have that conversation more quietly in a more considered way, rather than, the train is moving and I've got to catch up or stop it. So I wouldn't actually read too much into this. Wherever it lands up, people will have their views about, what the changes do or don't mean. I suspect that there'll be a lot of balance, and that there'll be some things which tend in one direction and some things that tend in another direction, because that's been what REF throughout my life has looked like. Every REF, there have been bits that one has liked and bits that one hasn't liked from various standpoints. So I'm not trying to fudge there, but I genuinely think that the REF pause was much more about just taking breath on something that matters an awful lot to a lot of us. And I hope that that's been successful, and that we can all now get behind something which, after all, fundamentally delivers a very large amount of money to universities in England, called QR, and helps the delivery of the equivalents in the devolved administrations, which is money which responsible universities do use to support EDI in their own environments and their own cultures. So we've got to get this right. It is important.
Thanks.
I hope that helps, and Jemina and colleagues obviously try to be open and honest. These are all very complicated areas and much best discussed probably in person. Apologies, and certainly calmly. But I just want to say that EDICa has done some fantastic work, and we're so grateful to you for just taking a kind of measured approach and giving us the evidence, because that is the way we move forward. So thank you.
And thank you, Christopher, as well, for giving up your time today, especially if you, as you said, you're in Oslo at the moment. So we know you've had to take time out of your schedule to join us online. It would have been nice to have you here in person, but we're really happy that you are able to join us online at least. And thanks for your presentation and your considered answers to the questions. Unfortunately, we have run out of time now. We won't be able to get to the other questions, but we'll set you back into the wild, and we'll carry on with our programme for the day. And we'll keep you posted on progression. As you know, we've actually have an extension of the EDICa Caucus, the EDI Caucus, until the end of next year. So we've got still got more work to do, which will be passing your way. So we'll be in touch.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, everybody. All best wishes. Thank you.
Thanks, Christopher. And just a reminder to everybody that we do have 2 different sessions happening now. So for those of you who are online, you have one choice basically and it's a different Zoom link, which I'm just about to post in the chat. So you'll need to come out of this Zoom link and join into the different parallel session with Professor Dame Heather McGregor, who will be looking at EDI in the current political climate, with a panel of different speakers. And then in the main room here for in-person, we'll be sticking with this particular Zoom link, and I think no, it's actually in person only, I think, for what we're doing here. So I'm just going to post the different panel link in the Zoom chat now, so that people can, if you can move over please to the other parallel panel, and we will take a short comfort break just to give people some time to move over, and then we will kickstart on the other side. So see you in a few minutes. Thanks, everybody.